Welcome to the JavaScript for Beginners course, where I'm going to teach you the fundamentals of JavaScript programming language. We'll begin with writing a simple hello world message. I will be using Chrome DevTools console throughout this tutorial because it's a great way to get instant feedback on the code written, and I suggest you do the same. So let's get started with the console log command, which is going to output something in our console. And this is going to be hello world. So this is going to be your very first introduction into the JavaScript world. And using console log is going to be something you will be doing almost on a daily basis to output the values of variables onto the console so that you can use it to debug. Let's talk about variables. You can think of variables as containers. For example, a box that you can put stuff in and label it so that you can later reference it by the name and know what is inside. You can define a variable in three different ways. You can have a global variable that's called var, or you can have a local variable that's called let, and finally you can have a constant, which is a variable that is not going to change its value, and in effect it's actually a constant. You can assign a variable a value, so for example we can say var even number, and we can assign it the value number 2. And once we have defined the variable, we can actually reference it by calling that variable by its name, and it's going to output the value. We use the console log to render the value of an even number. You can of course choose to declare a variable without initializing to a specific value, and you can do that by typing var, let's say odd number, and not assigning it any value. In this case, odd number is going to be undefined because we haven't defined a specific value to it, and we can always assign a new value to the variable as long as it is a global variable or a local variable but not a constant by doing the following. So odd number equals 7, and that is going to assign the value 7 to the odd number variable. And if I reference it again using console log odd number, the value has now been updated to be 7. We'll explore the difference between var and let variables a bit later with the context of functions. However, for now, just so you know, the difference between var and let is the scope of the variable. Vars are usually declared globally and are accessible throughout the entire JavaScript file. However, the lets are usually locally scoped variables and only accessible within the scope within which they have been declared. But don't let this confuse you right now because we are going to cover this in more detail a bit later. So initially we created a variable that's been assigned a number, so the data type of this particular variable is a number. However, there are other types of data that you can assign to a variable, and these include string, number, array, object, null, and undefined. So let's cover each one of them. Let's start with the string. So I can create a constant called name, and I can assign my name value as a string, which is called Nick. Obviously, my name is Nick. So if I reference name, I will actually get the string Nick. So this is one of the data types that you can use. We've checked the number already, so we can move on to another concept that is called array. An array is a storage of various elements and values that can be of different data types. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to create an array that is going to hold my name and a number, which would be my age. So Nick, 26. And you can create an array by using square brackets and inserting values limited by comma. So if I reference array now, I'll see that I have two elements inside the array. I have Nick and I have 26, and I also have the length, which is 2. And the 0 here refers to the position of this element within the array. And because JavaScript is 0 indexed, that means that the first element in the array is actually the number 0 element of the array. So we start counting from 0 instead of counting from 1. And if I want to access the value Nick, I can type array square brackets 0, and I can get the value. We are going to cover more about arrays a bit later into this tutorial. The next data type I'm going to cover is an object. An object allows you to have key value pairs, whereby you can name a key however you want, and you can assign it a value to whatever the data type you want. It sort of works like an array, however it's part of a bigger object that allows you to reference that value as part of a specific context. So what does that mean? Let's create a new object that is called person. And that object is going to have a few key value pairs. So one of them is going to be name, and I'm going to name it Nick. And the other one is going to be age, and I'm going to write 26, just like in the previous example, quite similar. So now that I've created the person object, I can actually access the value with the dot notation. So I can press dot person dot name, and I can reference the name of the person, which is Nick. There are two more data types in JavaScript, undefined and null. They're quite similar, but also quite different at the same time. We already saw the use of undefined before when we first created a variable that we didn't assign a value to. So let's try and do it again. I'm going to create a variable called not defined, and I'm not going to assign it any value. There are two more data types in JavaScript, undefined and null. They're quite similar, but also quite different at the same time. We already saw the use of undefined before when we first created a variable that we didn't assign a value to. So let's try and do it again. I'm going to create a variable called not defined, and I'm not going to assign it any value. So I'm pressing enter, and I can see that if I reference not defined, it's going to return undefined. However, at the same time, there's a concept called null, which means the value is pretty much a blank. So let's try and create another variable that is defined now as a null. So var is null equal null. And if we reference is null, we're going to see that it returns null. So what is the difference between those two? In the first case, the variable has no value defined with it. That's why it's called undefined. We don't assign it any value. However, in the second case, where we actually do a value assignment, we just call it null. And null is a concept that pretty much means the value you have assigned here represents a blank state, a blank value. So this is the difference between undefined and null. In the next lesson, I'm going to cover strings in a little bit more detail and also talk about the template literals. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.